Pain is your check engine light on a car, and it's telling you that there's something wrong here and that we need to make some sort of a change. How do we do that when something is hurting? Let's take a step back and recognize that this is a signal. We need to be curious about what the pain is trying to teach us rather than be fearful of it. As soon as we are afraid of it and trying to eliminate it, we're turning it into an enemy, and then we're villainizing it in a way that is going to amplify the pain for us. So we have to be willing to listen to what it's trying to teach us, and we have to be open to learning what it is trying to teach us.
Pain is confusing. Sometimes the pain that you feel is very real, but the messages that you're getting are confused. They're crossing their wires, your nervous system's a little confused. You can't always just take it at face value because the sensation of pain that you're having doesn't always equal damage or something that needs to be, fixed.
Welcome to the Restore to Explore podcast from your soulmates at the Foot Collective. We're on a mission to empower humans to restore their natural health and function from the ground up, so we can all explore movement and life with freedom and confidence. This week's episode is brought to you by the TFC Soulmate, your ultimate all-in-one restoration and exploration tool. Made from cork, TFC Soulmates are an eco-friendly, lightweight and durable mobility, balance and foot training tool that can be used as a massage roller, foot roller, balance beam, a slant board, and even includes 2 toe resistance bands. Every TFC Soulmate comes with access to an in-depth training manual with guided routines from TFC health professionals to make improving foot function and balance fun and accessible for all ages and abilities. For 10% off your Soulmate, head to thefootcollective.com and use the code R2E. That's R, the number 2, E at checkout. You'll find the details in the show notes.
All right. Hello, friends. And thanks for being here. Welcome to the Restore to Explore podcast. I'm Nick, and today I'm speaking with Andrew and Katie from Wealth. Andrew and Katie, welcome, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having us again 3 years later.
You are most welcome. And we spoke 3 years ago in June of 2021, which was on the TFC audio project. So we had a health conversation. So it's great to reconnect. And to start with, 3 years is a long time, especially in a world that's moving very fast as business owners. Like I know myself, it's like in the world of business, things change month over month, let alone years. So if you can archive and remember sort of where you were-ish in mid 2021 up until now, if listeners want to refer to that podcast, they can. But let's bring them up to speed on where you're at. The main curious things is like, how is Spread Wealth changing and evolving? And also, how are you evolving in your understanding, practice, your own health? Like, what are the cheat codes? What are all the meaningful things since that point? Let's start there.
Ladies first.
Yeah, on a business front, when did we launch our hypermobility program? I was
2022.
2022, yeah. So we did launch an entire program specifically designed for people who are hypermobile, because both of us have hypermobile EDS. So that has been really exciting and fun working with that demographic of people. We're very passionate about that. We've continued to work with people with chronic pain in general, all over their body. We continue to take a full body approach. A lot of folks with disc herniations, bulges, etc. And then on a personal front, we got married.
Congrats.
Finally. Officially, we were engaged during COVID, and then it was just like one thing after another. So we finally had the actual wedding, which was very fun.
Completed.
Yeah.
Very nice. And good for you for taking the time. Like it's not a rush. I think a lot of people find it to be a rush, and maybe that's just my perspective. Who am I to say what people should think? But I think there's something about really getting to know someone deeply and having the marriage be an organic thing that happens, not like this contract that you impose on a relationship because it's what you should do. So good for you.
Yeah, and I think it's wild. We've been together in this house since before COVID actually hit, like nonstop every day for years, and we're not tired of each other. And I don't know. So we obviously tested everything out and it was like, let's get this done.
Yeah, I think COVID was a good test for a lot of relationships of,
Agreed.
It was like make or break during COVID for a lot of people. And for us, we were like, we could keep doing this for a long time.
And the ones who didn't make it shouldn't have made it. So it just fast tracks. It's like, find out quicker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. And then your hypermobility program, how, in terms of the response to that, were there more people in that, category than you thought? How has that been received? How has the volume been of the people that you help?
I think it took a little bit of time at first. Like the when we launched it, it was great. It took about a year for it to really start to like pick up, because our other program, the Limitless program, which covers the full body, it's for the general public, was always just it was like 90% of the people that were coming in. And then it's kind of transitioned to almost like a 50-50, close to that over the last couple of years.
I think specialization is a cheat code in the world of business, like really dialing in who you work with, in deeply understanding that person, their needs, and how to work with them better than anyone else. Frankly, if you specialize like really deeply, is a great move. So good on you for reaching that audience. And if anyone's listening, you got hypermobility, you got a set of people who are working with folks like you and can give you some specialized guidance. So,
and cool. To be clear, hypermobility isn't necessarily just about the joints. That's what people often see, but it does impact every system of the body, the GI, the nervous system as well.
Yeah, it can. For some people, it is just, isolated to even a single joint, maybe as a result of an injury or, overuse or something like that. But then some people have generalized joint hypermobility all over the place, but they may not really have many issues beyond that. And then, you have people with connective tissue disorders where then it's all the connective tissues in the body. So they have very widespread systemic impacts from that. And there's not really a gold standard in terms of a practitioner who treats that. A lot of times they're referred to a geneticist for diagnosis, or sometimes a rheumatologist. Some PTs might have some knowledge of hypermobility, but there's not like a specialist to take care of these people. So a lot of times they're kind of lost in terms of getting help.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So today I want to talk about this idea that we're working on at TFC and that I've been spending a lot of time on, which is best practices, and sort of the idea of establishing a set of critical behaviors that every lower extremity health professional really needs to touch on in their approach in order to be effective. And they're very general principles. So I figured we could use that as a framework for discussions of like, do you agree with these best practices? How do you apply them? What's just your thoughts on it? But before we do that, I wanted to ask you each two questions that are very specific. So let's start with the first one. In one sentence or less, and then that's the hard part. One sentence or less, how do you define health? And either of you can go first. If you want me to pick someone, I can, but try and think through it first before the other person speaks, because oftentimes with multiple people, it's like, I agree with that person. One sentence or less, how do you define health?
I don't know how to put this. I have the thought, and I'm just going to say it. It's not what I necessarily want to say. Health is the quality of the life that you're living.
Similarly, I was going to say the ability to feel or function at an optimal level.
Love it. And you have the right to change your mind in a second if you want, but I'm always very, very curious what people say with that definition. And the reason I love to ask it to everyone I talk to is because a lot of the people that have come to me in the past for help with their health, one of the first things I ask them is, well, how do you define health? Right? You're coming to me to get to a place. What place is that? And it always shocked me how few people actually have a reasonable definition of that. And so, trying to get somewhere that you don't even know how to identify is very hard. And I also find it interesting, based on individual context, how people's definitions vary so much. In particular, if someone has pain, usually their definition is no pain, which I think is totally understandable for that person, but also kind of a low bar, because just not being in pain has nothing to do with thriving and living a great life. It just means you're not in constant pain. And yeah, so thank you for those.
And you can thrive and have a great life and also have pain.
Yeah, I mean, yes. One of the best practices is pain education. So I'm keen to get into that discussion with y'all, to just understand, how do you bring that up? How do you convey, a simple understanding of pain, and how would you talk about pain to a 10-year-old? Because I find for myself that mental experiment is a really valuable one, and actually turns out to be the best way to talk about it to anyone. My second question is, how do you define wealth?
Yes.
One sentence or less, also caveat.
Do you want us to start with the first question or the second question?
Let's do how do you define wealth
Okay.
in one sentence or less? Katie, you go first this time.
Well, our business is named Wealth, spelled W Health.
Yes.
So these questions are very, very fitting. So we came up with that name because of the saying, your health is your wealth. And that came from, having a nursing background and working with some patients who were at their end of their life, and hearing them reflect on their lives. People never spoke about, there was never any regret about jobs or materialistic things. It was always regret about, I wish I had taken better care of myself. I wish I had stopped smoking. Or it was about relationships. I wish I had been there for my kids, my brother, my whatever. And so it was really just the belief that, your truest form of wealth, people usually think of wealth as a financial thing, but your truest form of wealth is your health. It's something that it doesn't matter how much money you have. You can't buy it. It's not something you can quickly get. It really requires those long-term investments over time. That was not one sentence.
Yeah, I'm like, wasn't one sentence.
That was the longest sentence I ever heard, but I liked it.
I don't think I can add to that. I mean, that's what we've talked about for so long. I mean, your health is your wealth is ultimately.
Cool.
The
I love that. Because, I think I work mostly now in the space of financial education. I basically teach people, try and help them unlearn what they think they know about money, and then relearn money from first principles of like what actually makes a good money. And all those roads, in my experience, lead to Bitcoin, which is a whole other discussion. But there's this idea of a dichotomy between rich people who have a lot of money with no real emphasis on anything about the quality of the relationships, the health of their body, all that kind of stuff. So you can be rich, you can have tons of money. But I would guess that most rich people, as soon as they come into health problems, significant ones, would trade all their money for better health. And this idea that, when you save in money that's designed to last 1,000 years without being diluted, it really makes you think about, well, I want to be around to appreciate that energy that I've accumulated. I also want to be healthy enough to do the things I want to do. Because having a bunch of money and not having the health to be able to travel, play with your grandkids, do the things you want to do that bring you joy is kind of useless. What's the point? So I really think this idea of wealth having, like a biological component of health and then a capital component of financial capital, which is really just stored time, right? Like money is just a tool we use to store our time. So I love the branding of wealth with an H, because I completely agree. Money is useless without health. And I think part of being healthy is having enough financial resources to do what you want to do in life and live like you want to live. So very cool. Love that. Thanks for those definitions. Let's talk about best practices. And by all means, if you want to talk about anything else to mention, I've talked a lot about feet. So I'm always open to foot discussions. But at the end of the day, it's just wear good shoes that don't mess your feet up and move a lot, and you'll probably be okay. But best practices are something I'm really interested in, because I think the landscape of lower extremity health professionals is a broad one, right? Everything from personal trainer, reflexologist, strength coach, all the way up to a GP who deals with knee pain, or even an orthopedic surgeon who deals with knee and ankle issues. So broad spectrum, anyone whose job it is to help other people improve their health, and who does that professionally as their primary means of income, I think is a health professional. Which also means that if your job is to diagnose and treat symptoms, I actually don't think you're a health professional, although most people will think they are. But I think if you treat symptoms of disease without actually helping people improve their bodies, you're a disease care professional, you're not a health professional. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes for people who pay for the expensive degrees to think they're a health professional. So as lower extremity health professionals, in my experience over the past 8 years, there's sort of like a few fundamental practices that everyone really should be doing if they call themselves a lower extremity health professional. And these serve as sort of best practices or principles for effectiveness, meaning that if you're a low extremity health professional and you're not doing these things, one or any of these things, you're probably not sort of living up to a standard of care that I think is reasonable to expect from anyone whose job it is to help others. So we'll go through these 5. They're very general, but I'd like to open up a discussion on each of them and just know, like, from your perspective, would you consider that a best practice? Do you apply it? And we can riff on whatever you want regarding that. So,
cool.
The first one is mindset education, which is an incredibly general principle, right? And has many, none of this is prescriptive in telling people how to apply this. And obviously, it should be applied differently for every single different person that we see. So there's no one way, but there are these general things that we need to touch on. So when you hear the word mindset education, what do you think of? And is there a mindset element to the people, to the work you do with the people that you see?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so mindset education for me is pretty broad. Like you could break that up into subsets as well. For us, it could be the words that people are using, like how they're describing their struggles, their pain, whatever. For us, we deal with people in pain. So I'm going to really just focus on pain as the issue here. The words that they're using makes a difference. So if they're using words like "I want to do this," but, and they're using words like "but" in their sentences instead of "and," you're then kind of combining those two things together. So if you want to go climb a mountain, but your foot hurts, then every time you think about climbing the mountain, you're actually linking it to your pain, or vice versa. If you say "and my foot hurts," it actually allows you to separate the two subjects together. And this is like such a small and stupid sounding thing to even
think it's
talk
really
about,
important.
that, and it's like all of our language. I can watch people come into our community and they'll write out paragraphs about their issues, and I can just pick apart each of the sentences and how they can be restructured. And I won't do that for them immediately, but over time I'll have them like readjust how they're thinking about and talking about their pain, not just in the community, but to themselves in their own mind and to the people around them. And that makes a massive difference to how they're experiencing their pain. The other thing is pain education, teaching them how pain works and allowing them to really shift this mindset that they are causing damage every time they take a step and their foot hurts. They think that their plantar fascia is tearing, their Achilles is tearing, something like that. And really, explaining to them, okay, if you've been experiencing this pain for a long time, there may not even be a physical issue here. And kind of describing the neurological aspects of pain and the psychological components that contribute to it. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting the way that you can kind of tell where someone's mindset is at based off of the way they talk about things. Like when someone reaches out to us about their situation, there are some people that you can tell by the way that they word things and kind of just where they're at, that this person has a pretty long road ahead of them. And then there are some people that come in and you're like, okay, this person, their mindset is almost there. Like they're going to have a pretty quick recovery, most likely. I mean, it definitely does seem to impact in a lot of cases, especially with chronic pain. It just really does have a big impact on how people do moving forward, how quickly they're able to recover and feel better and return to things. And I think ultimately people tend to get to a point where they're actually grateful for the experience that they went through. That's typically not the case when they first come to us. They're usually very frustrated, depressed, anxious. They're kind of like have tried so many things. They feel very hopeless, isolated. It's impacting their every facet of their life. And then they go through this transition where ultimately at the end, they're really grateful because they have learned so much that has then impacted every other area of their life, even like the finances we were talking about. Like people start to learn like, oh, this is what I can do if I'm consistent and patient and can shift my mindset. And then they start to apply that to their relationships and their job and their, and it has this trickle effect where they're like, hey, I came to you because I had back pain, but like this changed my life, like all of my life. So it's really cool to see.
Yeah. And I think just putting a name on mindset education, making it tangible, because we all kind of do it to some extent. It was never taught to me explicitly in school and probably would have been the most beneficial thing I would have learned because I would have picked up these language nuances and how people talk about themselves and their bodies, right? Do they view their body as this enemy that's constantly fighting them and breaking down as this terrible thing? Or do they view it as like this extremely advanced self-healing system where it's just their job to figure out what they're doing to cause it to have an issue? And Katie, you said a few things: patience, consistency. I think for me, the idea of just health, developing better health being a process, not an event, and having people really zoom out, think long term, and just think like, I'm just going to get 1% better today. I'm going to do one better thing today than I did yesterday. And I'm going to know that this process is not I'm not doing this in a rush, right? I'm thinking long term. I'm not making decisions today to feel better. Today, I'm making decisions today to feel better eventually, which means sometimes having some discomfort is part of that journey. Whereas the short-term mindset is pain bad, get out of pain, even if it means doing shit that is actually going to cause you more pain in the long run. So yeah, I think mindset education can be in as long format or short format as we want, or as the person demands. But I think by not explicitly starting with some sort of mindset education and like really understanding the person and their current mindset, and then calibrating that to align with the process that you're helping them go through, is super important. Because if someone has a poor mindset and you don't tap into that and correct it right away, you can do all the right things in the plan. But if their mindset is like this toxic element that's actually stopping, challenging them, and being an obstacle constantly, in my opinion, it's a way harder go, and it's not as enjoyable. And so just the mindset that the body's amazing. I got to figure out what I'm doing to cause the problems, and I got to think really long-term, because health is a long-term process. To me, that encapsulates sort of the mindset education element. Yeah. Anything else to say on mindset?
Sure. I mean, there's so much to say. The type A and type B personalities, if you're super type B, you find yourself not really doing enough. If you're super type A, you get super analytical and so into the weeds that you drive yourself crazy. So trying to get yourself somewhere in the middle is really important. The other thing is I see a lot of victimhood, especially nowadays with social media. That seems to become very rampant. So not really taking responsibility for the situation you're in and kind of pushing it off onto other people prevents people from growing and learning. And that's, trying to get someone to adjust away from that thinking. Those people I often need to be quite firm with in the community to get them to recognize that they are in control of their lives.
And then it doesn't matter. I mean, you can have been dealt the worst hand of cards, right? Like it could be the surgeon's fault. They messed up and then someone, hit you with their car and you got hurt. Like, and that can all be true. It can be true that it is someone else's fault that this is the situation that you're in, but it's still your body and your situation that you are in. And no one is coming to save you and make it better. Like it is in your hands to, direct and guide your care and get yourself out of this situation. So it's okay to vent about some of that, but people just kind of get stuck in this, blaming, and I'm a victim. And it's like, okay, but like at some point we got to get you out of that and move on.
And I think part of mindset rather is confidence. Like, what is people's confidence? Like, I would sometimes ask patients when I was treating in clinic, like, do you actually feel like you can get through this and get beyond this injury? And some people are like, no, I've always had this. I've been told that I'm just going to have this forever. I got to manage the pain. And so double clicking on that instead of just glancing through it is actually incredibly important. And it's just something that I don't know. It just doesn't seem, it seems like we've gotten sometimes very analytical and very systematic with how, like, you're a movement coach, someone comes in, here's the spiel, here's the assessment, blah, blah, blah. But we kind of easily glance over mindset because it's never really been, talked about broadly, right? You can assume that someone adopts the mindset you have. And I think that's the easy way, but it's much more nuanced to actually like assess someone's mindset. Like, you can't just be like, hey, what's your mindset when it comes to health? No, you have to like, what is your issue? How long has it been going on for? How confident are you with getting rid of this? Are you thinking long-term? Are you just trying to get out of pain? It's more work, but I think it's the best practice for anyone who's helping others to at least inquire and to just say, health is a process, think long-term, look through that lens. And maybe that's all you do initially, but I think it's important.
Agree.
Best practice number 2, movement education. This is another incredibly broad one, and will be radically different for different people, for different professionals. But what are your thoughts on just basic fundamental movement education being a best practice for lower extremity health pros?
Do you want to go or should I?
It's up to you.
I think you'll probably agree, but I'd love to hear, what does that mean to you? How does that show up in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great basis for people, especially if they don't have any type of movement background. I think it can help people gain confidence. I think you have to have some starting point for people just to have a basic understanding of anatomy and positioning and technique and like what is a squat. Like, I mean, you could do a whole podcast on just a squat, but like people just need to understand when I say squat that they know what that means. So I think in regards to that, I think it is important. I think we do, I would say, a little bit of a bait and switch with people in that people often want the movement education. A lot of our social media videos are movement education based. People don't always want what they need. They think they know what they need, and they usually think that they need the movement, that if they get their movements just perfect, then the pain's going to go away and it's going to stay gone, and that's just not reality. So, we do cover movement, but, there's a lot more emphasis on the mindset and nutrition and sleep and restoration and relationships and stress management and like a very, holistic view of things.
And I will say that going off of that, the people that want to be perfect with their movement often find themselves struggling a lot more than the people who are more cavalier with their movement. They create their own issues by trying to be perfect. So on top of that, we have people come into our platform, and if they have foot pain or back pain or neck pain or something like that, we have them go through the entire body as a whole. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. People don't know what they don't know. And we're just teaching them all of the movements of the body, like your joint can do this, and let's teach you how to strengthen your joint to have more range of motion there. And even if they have back pain and they're doing stuff with their shoulder or their foot, they're like, this isn't my back. We are connected together as a piece. And it's hard to say that like, improving your shoulder might help your back. That's really impossible to prove, but it's worth a shot. So when we have people coming in from all over the world, we're not just seeing people in the United States. We've got people in India and Korea and Russia coming into our programs and doing the work here. So those people don't even necessarily have access to anything in their country that is like what we're teaching here. And we'll have people come in and just learn about the full body. And it's incredibly empowering to them to gain confidence, not just for their back, but for everything else. And on top of that, the neurological aspects, if you have pain sensitization, I have trouble saying that, where you've trained your nervous system to be hyper vigilant of your back pain, where every single movement you do hurts, then actually working on other areas of the body can help to desensitize that area. So we do things full body, always, all the time, because we don't ever really know what is going to be helpful. So we kind of take a bit more of a shotgun approach. And it is cookie cutter, but we do have a community where we can provide all kinds of variants to movements if something is impossible for them to do. Like someone today was like, my kneecap has dislocated twice a month for the last year. And like, I may need some help with some movements. Like, great, we can give you completely different exercises if your kneecap is at risk of dislocating during this one.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to think that, again, it's like if your movement literacy after years of really nerding out on movement is like level 10, it's easy to even assume that people are at like level 3. But in reality, there's so many people that are literally movement illiterate. It's not, not a pejorative bad thing. It's literally just no one has ever taught that human the fundamentals of movement. No one has meaningfully mentioned to that person that sitting in a chair 8 hours a day doing zero movement has a significant consequence on your whole system. Or wearing a shoe that stops all 33 joints in each foot from moving at all has significant consequences, which may not even manifest in the foot, may manifest elsewhere. So to me, basic movement education is really the human body requires varied, regular movement and load. The body parts need to be moved if we want them to keep being able to move. Muscles must be loaded for them to maintain basic strength. Balance must be challenged to have fundamental balance. And that literally is it. It's like, therefore, based on that, if you're sitting all day in a chair, sitting 6 to 8 hours, you're not getting enough movement nutrients into your system. And maybe you don't need to do extra stuff. Let's just subtract the sedentariness and then we can add more stuff in. So yeah, just and a doctor can say that in 60 seconds, right? They may not be able to do a full-blown detailed movement assessment, but they can say your body requires varied load of movement all day long. That's what it's designed for. If you're not getting that, let's figure out how we can start to integrate more of that. And that's just simple, right? So simple. A 10-year-old can understand that. And I think that's what best practices are about, is like mentally, have I talked about mindset even very in a simple way? Yes. Have I talked about movement? So this person at least has the information that maybe I took for granted that they might already have, but probably don't. And like I said, if someone's really coming to you for movement, obviously the movement education piece is going to be way longer and disproportionately bigger than the other ones. But if you're not giving basic education on movement as a lower extremity health pro, you're probably not upholding a reasonable standard of care.
Mm-hmm.
So that's movement education. Third one, footwear education. This idea that if you call yourself a lower extremity movement professional or health professional and your domain is the lower body, to not talk about the piece of clothing that's covering people's foundation, even at a cursory level, seems like you're missing out on a giant element to this puzzle, right? It's like, it'd be like someone saying, hey, my house is messed up, there's cracks everywhere, and just ignoring the foundation altogether and being like, oh yeah, I think it's this. But you need to pay attention to the foundation. So how do you agree that footwear education to some extent is a best practice, and how does that show up in your work? What kind of questions are you getting? How do you convey footwear 101 to the people you work with, and has that changed?
We've been sharing the barefoot lifestyle since, I don't know, I wore my first Vivo barefoots almost 10 years ago, and I was wearing the Primus, no, not the Primus, the New Balance Minimus, and I wore the Merrell Trail Glove before that. So like I've been wearing them for about 12 years, and I noticed a massive difference in my own feet. Like my foot grew a whole size in length, which is cool. So I actually went up in size with all my shoes. But what we've noticed with people is that they just make improvements, not just with their foot mobility, but also their hip mobility, their posture changes. And so then it became very easy to just kind of preach that to people. What I notice in the physio community, there's certain physios out there that love research, is that they will tend to kind of knock the barefoot, what do I want to call it? The barefoot crusade down a little bit, saying like, it's not really, and I see the point, like you don't want to have to worry about the shoes that you're wearing. You can wear the shoes that you want to wear and all this stuff, but I don't necessarily agree with that. And I feel
Neither
that
do I.
Being connected to the ground and having a more stable surface is much more natural. Like we didn't have cushioned shoes for thousands of years. Why would a cushioned shoe seem like a reasonable thing to have? So I think getting more connected and being as barefoot as possible, no shoes altogether, is ideal for most people. But it takes time to build up to that.
It does
for some people.
And I think my biggest piece when educating about footwear is not actually telling people what to wear. It's literally just saying, don't wear shoes that mess your foot up. Don't wear shoes that damage, disable, and deform your feet. And that seems like a not so radical statement to make, but then people are like, well, what does that shoe look like? And, a physio saying, I don't care about shoes would be like, my favorite analogy is, okay, these turtlenecks start to come into fashion, and these turtlenecks are so tight around the neck that you can't move your neck. You have to move like a board. And a physio seeing all these people with neck pain, and he's not saying stop wearing the frickin' turtleneck that stops your neck from moving. That would be absurd. And I think the feet have just, I don't know, we've done this weird thing with shoes where we don't pay attention to them. We don't learn about natural footwear in any way in physio school, at least not when I went through my degree. And I'm almost positive they still don't. And so if you're a physio listening, if you're anyone that deals with the lower extremity, you don't talk about shoes, you're missing a giant opportunity. And you're not, again, you should just uphold a reasonable standard of care. It's not rocket science. If the body part that you work with is being covered by harmful clothing, it's up to you to warn the people you work with to not wear shoes that damage your bodies. Just like if you were a lung specialist physician, if you're not warning people about the dangers of smoking cigarettes, you're not really doing your job. And so it's trying to really nudge this into the mainstream to say, if you are someone that works with the lower extremity, you must talk about footwear to some extent. If at minimum, it's just help your people understand to not wear shoes that damage their feet, because most people are wearing those and they don't know they're doing it. Katie, anything come up when it comes to footwear education or how that's changed in terms of how you talk about it?
Same thing. I've been in barefoot shoes also for a long time, started with the New Balance and Merrell stuff, got into Vivo. I would say, probably the biggest thing that has changed or evolved over the years for me is really encouraging people to take a much more gradual approach to it. just having seen so many people that we educate them, they're like, okay, cool, I bought Vivos and then I went for a run and like I'm wrecked, And so especially with our hypermobile folks, really taking a very long-term transition. So like, okay, look, in a year, you're going to be in truly barefoot shoes. But first, let's get you in a wide toe box. And then let's start to decrease the drop in the cushion and like allow their body to adapt, especially for the hypermobile folks. They just don't do as well with those quick transitions. So really, again, just getting people to understand, like you said earlier, that it is a journey, it is a process, and especially to understand that there is not an end to this process. This isn't something where you check it off and cross it off your to-do list, because you might have the goal of overcoming your chronic back pain. But then once you do, inevitably, you're going to return to some hobby and get re-injured, or you're going to change careers and now your body is having different demands placed on it. And now you need to modify that, or, there's always going to be things that are going to change and evolve, and you're going to have to adapt continuously as you age. And even the process of aging itself is going to have some effects that you're going to need to continually adapt and modify and change. So it's getting people to understand that, this is a lifestyle. This is just something that you do now. It's not you do it until you're better and then you stop. You just do this now, and it's going to look different. In 5 years, it's going to look different. In 10 years, it's going to look different, but you're still going to be doing it.
We wanted to take a quick break from the episode to let you know about our ultimate free foot health resource. If you're listening, you've probably already started the journey towards improving your foot and movement health, but if you're still wearing conventional shoes most of the time, that's anything cushioned, heeled, narrow, or rigid, it's kind of like taking one step forward and 2 steps back. Knowing what shoe is right for you, though, can be super confusing. That's why we made the Guide to Foot Freedom. We've taken everything our team of foot health experts have learned over the years and synthesized it into one handy manual, packed with all you need to know about unleashing the natural power of your foundation. You'll learn how to understand your feet, the truth about modern footwear, the 5 F's for finding natural footwear, plus a step-by-step guide with training videos to help you assess your foot function and improve it, so you can safely and seamlessly transition into shoes that will finally give your feet freedom. The best part is, like I said, it's absolutely free. Just head to thefootcollective.com and click Learn to find the free ebook, The Guide to Foot Freedom. You'll find the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
And I think it's just respect the process of adaptation, which kind of leads us into the last best practice, which is pain education and just the idea of being able to self-regulate to some extent. But, back to what you're saying, I think, I think the majority of people just don't know the consequences of the shoes they wear. Even as something as simple as wearing an elevated heel, and, sort of the knock-on effects that you have all the way upstream, all the way to your low back, all the way to your neck even. It sounds hyperbolic to say that, but it's literally true. And if you want to see how big of a difference a small heel lift can make, take a Jenga tower, put a tiny wedge under the bottom block on one side, and see all the rearrangements you got to do to stop that thing from falling over. That's happening in your body. And so you're getting this manipulated signal from the ground where your body has to be like, okay, let's reorganize all the shit, because now I guess we have an elevated heel. And then you go to a flat shoe and your body's like, we organize everything again. And so it's just confusion. And I think while some people may take a little bit of time to really adapt to a flat shoe, when you get there, you at least have a truthful postural beginning so that your body can change things, but then not have to constantly change it again. And yeah, I just think footwear is, obviously I'm biased, but I think footwear is just not disproportionately important in and of itself, but because it's completely neglected, it deserves a lot of attention. And it can just be a 60-second, get a flat shoe that's shaped like your foot and is flexible. That's a good start. Here's a place that you can get them. Any style works, but that's literally just removing. It's like when trying to improve your health, start by subtracting the things that are causing the problems. I think that's a safe principle. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, I know so many people that are struggling with knee pain, back pain, hip immobility, and are doing hours a day, literally, of work to try and reclaim that. And then you look at their shoes and you're like, dude, you're literally working against yourself. And people just don't know. So again, it's this, don't assume that person knows anything about shoes, and just tell it to them in a very simple, tangible way, And it can go a long way because shoes are the one-time change that gives a lifetime of dividends. And I just think it's largely overlooked.
Can I ask you a question about the shoe? Do you feel that it has a disproportionate impact on women versus men shoes, given that women are often I don't want to say forced into, but like expected to wear high heels? I think of, the years I spent bartending in heels because that was the expectation.
Yes.
And then add pregnancy to that and, the imbalances kind of that creates and the things your body has to do to make up for that. Do you feel like it is more?
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you just look at the incidence of bunions.
Yeah.
Look at an average 40 to 50-year-old man's foot and an average 40 to 50-year-old woman's foot, and the answer's there. Not to mention, I think there's some nuance there where shoes for women are generally smaller volume and not as wide. But if you look at functional anatomy of humans that have never worn shoes, there's not that big of a delta between a woman's foot and a man's foot. There is in length, like in actual linear measurements. But we do this weird thing with women's shoes where it seems like there's this legacy desire to have small looking cute feet, and it just punishes feet terribly. And so, I mean, we have a store in Ottawa called Soul Freedom. We serve Canadians for natural footwear, and our biggest clientele is 40 to 50-year-old women who have just gnarly bunions and are now starting to realize, actually, I care more about the health of my foot than I care about this perception that small pointed shoes are cute, because now they've created really uncute feet. And now I just want to feel good. I don't want to impress anyone. I don't want to do shit that damages my body. I wish I would have known this when I was 20, so I didn't end up here. But at the end of the day, I think it doesn't matter how old you are, what state your body's in, your body adapts to the inputs you give it. If you start giving it better inputs, it's going to start recalibrating and restoring itself. And I think, like you said, there's this idea that it doesn't end, but the whole name Restore to Explore is sort of this process that we view the entire journey through, where it's like you need to restore basic function, not just to not have pain. I mean, that's a good objective when you're in pain, but it's also, you need to have something that ties meaning to that process, because there is work and consistency required. And if it's to explore life fully or explore the movements or the activities you want to do, once you get beyond the restore period, you might not have to do the same work-like stuff, but you need to be able to explore broadly enough so that you don't have to go back to restore, right? Like your lifestyle becomes your resilience training without all the supplements per se, the mobility supplements or the strength supplements. Like your life has mobility and strength challenges built into it. Therefore, living fully is your training. And sometimes that's hard to convey to people, or people just don't look at it through that lens, because they're just like, I'm going to be working on this stuff forever because I've been working on it forever and it's not getting better. It's like, well, you need to try something different. So that's the first three: mindset education, movement education, footwear education. The fourth one is pain education. And this is, I figure, the one that you probably deal a lot with if you're dealing with a lot of people with pain. So I'd love to know your cheat codes of how does this, obviously it's going to be different for everyone. But if you had to distill out the principles of what you're saying or what you're trying to convey to almost everyone, regardless of where they're coming from, how are you explaining pain to someone in 60? Someone comes to you and they look at pain as like, when I get pain, I know I'm all about the constraints because it really forces the radical trimming. I'm not going to set a timer, but just concisely, someone comes to you and let's say that they think pain is the enemy. They're doing everything they can right now to get rid of pain, taking drugs, eliminating movements from their life that hurt. And they have no really context to look at pain as anything other than a terrible thing that must be muted and eliminated because it feels terrible. How are you entering that conversation to try and give them an alternate perspective?
So the quick response to that would be that, like, pain is your check engine light on a car, and it's telling you that there's something wrong here and that we need to make some sort of a change. Now, generally we want to work on making that change, but how do we do that when something is hurting? We need to take a step back and recognize that this is a signal. It is a message, And we need to be curious about what the pain is trying to teach us rather than be fearful of it. As soon as we are afraid of it and trying to eliminate it, we're turning it into an enemy. And then we're villainizing it in a way that is going to amplify the pain for us. So we have to be gracious with it. We have to be patient and be willing to listen to what it's trying to teach us. And we have to be open to learning what it is trying to teach us.
I would
think that was probably 60 seconds. That was good.
That was good. I think I would add, making sure that people understand that pain is confusing. Sometimes that is like a very, simplified, straightforward 60-second answer. But a lot of people come already of the impression that the pain is telling them something and they need to fix it. And so sometimes it's just a matter of educating them on the fact that sometimes like the pain that you feel is very real, but the messages that you're getting are confused. They're crossing their wires. Your nervous system's a little confused, like acting a little drunk. It's, you can't always just take it at face value because the sensation of pain that you're having doesn't always equal damage or something that needs to be, fixed tissue wise or, body wise.
I think that's a super important point that I always try. And it's like, to me, the main ones are pain is a teacher we need to learn from. It's our most important signal to actually go in the right direction. It's a teacher, not an enemy. And the point you said, Katie, where it's like pain does not necessarily, it can, but does not necessarily mean damage. And even I've literally seen people's shoulders drop and a look of relief come across their face when I tell them that, because I was the first person that ever told them that, despite many dozens of doctor visits or whatever. And I think, again, pain education being a best practice is just, we all should take some responsibility to ensure that the people we're helping have a good understanding of pain so that they can appreciate it as an extremely valuable signal and not orient everything they do around the elimination of pain. Because like you said, if you're trying to mute the most important signal for recovery, probably not going to go well. And so it's just I like to give the fire alarm analogy. You're in your kitchen, fire alarm goes off. Are you going to figure out where the fire is and try and put it out? Or are you just going to take the batteries out of the fire alarm and then act like everything's cool? It's like no one would do the second part, but we often do that with pain. And it's a frame shift for people sometimes when you say listen to pain, write about it, learn about it, inquire about it curiously. I love that you said curiosity, Andrew, because I think that's, oftentimes there's just fear of pain, and it's like fear of your body. And that is like this fundamental element that's going to create a disconnect for any recovery process. So thanks for that input.
We like to share a lot of stories and facts, information about how pain has been misconstrued for people. People say that they don't want to have any pain, and I tell them I cannot ever remember the name of the genetic disorder, but the people that aren't able to feel any pain in their body, they usually don't live past the age of 20 because they maybe broke their femur and they're bleeding out internally and they have no idea.
Exactly.
And so pain is incredibly important for keeping us alive. So we want to be grateful that we can experience pain. We don't want to experience too much, but we want to be grateful that we have it. A lot of visual... There's a book, it's called Explain Pain. There's this little mind tricks book that they have where people can go through and look at all of these different visual mind fuckery things that you look at. You're like, this image doesn't look normal, and you flip the book upside down and whatever. And so I show people this book on our coaching calls and just kind of show people that if your own vision is having trouble interpreting what it's looking at, then what are you imagining inside your body? You can't see the quote damage that has shown up on your MRI, your X-ray. You have these really scary reports from doctors saying that you have, these tears, and you start to visualize this dangerous stuff in your body. Yeah. And that alone is going to contribute to the pain that you're experiencing. And if you can get people to recognize that their own world that they see with their two eyes, that are the most used sense for and people that can see, if they can misinterpret what their eyes are seeing, then how in the hell are you going to actually know what's going on inside your body when it comes to pain and injury? And
I think there's a lot of fear mongering, unintentional, I would imagine. But in the world of disease care where individual professionals exist to kill pain, obviously pain is used as a lever to say you have this really bad thing and you have a lot of pain, therefore I must do this to make it better. Like that template, I think, is literally just been trained into traditional disease care professionals, and we need to move out of that, because actually I've firsthand seen the harm of how surgeons and doctors talk to their patients about pain when they come in, and maybe we do the whole first session just talking about pain and they leave in less pain, because now when something hurts, like you said, Andrew, they're not imagining their joint literally degrading and fizzling apart. They're actually like, oh, this is just my body saying I need to pay attention to this area. And from my experience, pain almost always starts with a little whisper, like, hey, check that out. Something going on there. And if you ignore it, it talks louder. And eventually it starts to yell at you. And if all we do is wait until it yells, it's a really inefficient way of going about things with a lot of suffering. And so again, it's like, to the runner who takes a bit of Advil because their knee hurts before a run, it's like, maybe that's the governor to say you need to like reevaluate how you're moving, or else you pay the price long term. And so again, that mindset piece is like, think long term. This pain is here as a signal to benefit you. And if you pay attention to it, the long term will be brighter. Whereas if you just mute this with this short term idea of like, I just want to get through this workout, so I'm going to mute this pain, and you end up paying for it for 2 weeks or not being able to compete in a year, I don't know if that's a desirable outcome, but just most people aren't being told about pain, right? Implicitly, disease care professionals are implicitly incentivized to not talk about pain in that way. Now, they're not trying not to, but like their salary depends on people not understanding pain, which is kind of a shame to say, but that's where health professionals, I think, have a chance to step in and just take away all the money and time and energy being spent on disease care and actually help people improve their health.
It's always crazy to me when the people come that have had all the imaging done. They're like, yeah, we can't find anything wrong. Like I've had a CT, I've had an MRI, I've had an X-ray, I've had and they're convinced that there is something to find. Like they're still in that, like, what imaging should I ask for now? And it's like the fact that nobody, like doctors have ordered all of this imaging, but at no point has anyone explained to you that there may not be anything to find on the imaging, that this might be more of a neurological issue. Like, they hear it from us for the first time sometimes, and they're just like, it's a shift that has to occur to kind of get them out of this, like trying to figure out what it is. It's like, let's not get caught up in what it is, because ultimately it doesn't matter what it is as long as we can move on from it, right? As long as you're free from it, who cares what it was? You've had the imaging. We know it's not like a tumor or some, rare, terrible thing. So like, let's let that go and let's focus on what we can figure out.
Yep. And even phantom limb pain is a great
Talk
example
about
of
that every time.
Yes.
Of just the idea that like people get pain in limbs they don't even have. And I don't know if you've seen this experiment where someone has their hand on one side and a rubber arm on the other, and someone goes and stabs the rubber arm, like, and then the brain literally is acknowledging it as their arm until they realize, oh, phew, that's not my arm. So it's like, like you said, Andrew, if our visual system can be tricked by a little book, like our whole body can sometimes misinterpret signals. And I think evolutionarily, it's way more beneficial to trigger a low threshold alarm when it doesn't need to be an alarm than to not trigger an actual alarm. And where that shows up for me with people is like, this insane back pain you have might be just your body saying, I don't know what's going on here. And until we find it out, or until you prove to me that you should be allowed to move, you're not allowed to do anything. And it doesn't mean you broke your spinal cord in half, but your body's treating it as that until you prove to it otherwise, because evolutionarily, that was the better play for survival.
We like to compare people's chronic persistent pain to a house alarm, where normally if someone opens the door when the alarm is sounded, then the alarm goes off. Maybe you broke your leg or something like that. The alarm goes off, you have pain. Oh no, let's deal with this. Chronic pain at some point has some wires have been crossed, and maybe some catastrophization has occurred in your mind where you're constantly ruminating about the pain that you're experiencing. and you start putting so much emphasis on your back pain, for instance, and how it's affecting your life. And like you go to bed thinking about how you're going to have pain that night and how you're going to wake up in more pain and like, what's my day going to be like? And you're constantly ruminating and thinking about the pain you're experiencing. You're taking that fire alarm and you're amplifying it. So now you've got cameras on the outside of your house and a squirrel walks across the street and your alarm goes off. So any sensation at that point can now be interpreted as pain because you've turned up the dial on your nervous system, on your house alarm, and it is now going to respond accordingly whenever there's a sensation because you're looking for it.
Yeah. Pain is a rabbit hole. Psychology of pain is just a wonderful rabbit hole to go down if you work with people in pain, but also I think a big problem and giant opportunity. And I think that's why, as a best practice, again, people can apply it in different ways, but I think we all need to have some consensus that talking about pain in a way that reflects it to be a signal that's beneficial and important and shouldn't be muted is like the take home that I think all health pros need to kind of buckle down on and agree on, because I've found that to be the truth. And I'd love to hear people who disagree with that. But I think the average person needs to know that's true. And best practices are not just for pros as a checklist of like, make sure I go through these things. They're also for individuals to be aware of what best practices are. So if they go see someone and they're not talking about pain, they're not talking about shoes, they're not talking about movement, it's like, go see someone else, because that person's not going to be able to be effective. They're not trying to not be effective, or give them best practices and give them a link and say, hey, check this out. You might want to look at this or whatever. Because an educated individuals can take more responsibility for their well-being, can also be better at selecting guides that they go see to make sure that they're actually have their best interests in mind. The last best practice is movement screens. So we won't go too deep into this, but the three that I think I get most value from are hands-free sit to stand. Can you go from standing and sitting on the floor to back up to standing without using your hands? Can you balance on one leg for 60 seconds with your eyes open on both sides? And can you get into a resting squat? So for me, those three just have a huge return on investment in terms of how much information I can get and how hard they are to compensate or to like wrap around. Because I think for me, a good movement screen makes the invisible visible. How do you apply movement screens? Which ones have you found to be effective? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, because we're in an online format, I had movement screens for a while and I ended up just taking them out because the movements themselves became the movement screen in particular. So if we're having people doing hip hinging or like foot gripping or doing some scapular work or, whatever it is, just the exercise itself provides enough information to the individual and us to then be able to help them and get them a better understanding of how their body can be moving. And for us, it was a time thing for people. People coming into the program, having a movement screen of, several exercises or movements was just getting in the way of people getting to the next steps, because, it is kind of like a book format. So we want to get rid of as many barriers as possible. So it was just getting them directly to the movements that were going to make a change. And they turned out to be the movement screens themselves.
And I think sometimes people would get kind of stuck in the movement screen, and it was almost making people more like, oh man, I can't do that with my body, or like my squat doesn't look right and that's a problem. And it was almost like reinforcing some of the fear for people sometimes, where when we got rid of that, it was sort of like, let's just move. Like, just take a deep breath. We're just going to move. Like, there's no pressure to do it perfect. There's no, the most important thing is that you're just moving. So I think it helped a little bit with the psychological aspect as well.
Yeah, for me, the benefit I found is just like in 5 minutes, I can get a good, and this is all based on in-person. So there's a difference between digital and in-person. Yeah. And one of the things I like too is I can, these screens are so simple. The prompts are very simple. And the idea that someone can rescreen themselves every week or every month and see tangibly their improvement of how they feel, how the screen looks, and have at least a lighthouse to work towards, to me, they've been beneficial. But again, in person, different dynamic. And
totally
I totally
agree.
Yeah. Get moving, things get better.
I was in the in-person setting for 4 years before I did the online, and it was helpful to give people some sort of baseline. Like, okay, great. Now that was difficult. You can see the improvement in a few weeks. And for the online format, it was just the exercises themselves became that, like, oh, look, I can do this now. And I wasn't able to then.
Yeah. And I think for some people, it opens their eyes too, to be like, a deep resting squat is a fundamental human position. Every human was born with that capacity and should still have it. And if you can't do it, it's not to shame you or say you're in bad shape. It's just like, let's work towards doing that.
Yeah.
Because that master screen checks all the boxes off, that all the major joint systems in your lower body have a baseline level of capacity that makes you be able to move like a human. Amazing. Well, that's already an hour, which goes by real quick. So
Yes,
anything else you want to chat about? And if not, where can people find out more about you, the work you do? And grateful for your time today. Thanks for the discussions.
Thank you for having us. I don't have anything other than you've commented about time going by quickly. I always joke that it's almost Christmas every month.
You say that on January 1st?
Yes.
It's like the people that leave their Christmas lights on all year long. They know what you're talking about.
Screw it. It's going to be no time.
So our website is spreadwealth.com. That's spelled spread, health.com. We are on all social media at Wealth, WHEALTH.
Nice. That's a catchy brand. I like it. And it has a deeper meaning too, now that I've heard you unpack health and wealth. And to anyone listening, check them out. If you're hypermobile, you have a couple specialists that are used to working with the issues that you might be facing, and maybe you have not had very much luck with finding people who can actually give you tailored help for whatever you're working through.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you both for your time.
Appreciate you having us, Nick.
Thanks for your attention. And my pleasure, always. And maybe in 3 years from now, June, let's put it on the menu for June 27. Let's do it again, see where you're at. And to anyone who wants to learn more about best practices, we'll have that somewhere on TFC's website. The goal is to have a place where people can give feedback, but also have a place for people to endorse it. And the goal is, if we want to build consensus and prove that these 5 behaviors, movement education, mindset education, pain education, footwear education, and some movement screening, if we want that to be adopted as a gold standard, if we gather 1,000 health professionals that endorse it by putting their name, their profession, and saying, like, I agree that these are true and this is the gold standard, it builds truth. And builds validity that this is actually a standard we can all strive towards. Doesn't matter what our specialty is or how we apply them. I think it's time to level up, because the fancy degree places are not really, they're still in the old world, and the new world is healthcare. The old world is disease care. So we want to help build a bridge and help build awareness that healthcare is the way forward. People need to take responsibility for their health. They need good resources, and they need guides that can help them restore function, not just people to help them mute their pain, because we just talked about that's not a good idea.
Definitely.
So thanks for listening, y'all, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Restore to Explore podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, we'd really appreciate you leaving a review wherever you're listening. That's the best way to support us and to help us reach more people. If you're after more free TFC education or training, looking for any of our TFC tools, natural footwear discounts, or you want specialized guidance on your foot health journey from a trusted TFC health professional, head to thefootcollective.com. All of the important links are in the show notes of the episode.